Welcome to the Divine Worth podcast, where we are letting go of our self-doubt, anxiety, fear, limiting beliefs so that we can step into the divine roles that God has for us. I am your host, life coach Karen Pappen, and together we are embracing our divine worth and potential. Welcome to the Divine Worth podcast. Our guest today is Emily Baker. And Emily, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate you letting me or inviting me here today. So thank you. I am a mentor and a guide. I work with LDS women, specifically helping them recognize how we have a divine identity, how to access and command spiritual power, and to be able to do that in a way that aligns with our divine feminine nature as children of God in our ability to become disciples of Jesus Christ. So that's a little bit about kind of the work that I do. I'm a mom, though, to 4 kiddos. I've got 3 boys and a little girl. I love all things reading, barefoot, rain. Yeah, so a little bit about me.
That's awesome. And it sounds like what you do is very much what this podcast is about.
So much
Awesome.
so. When you reached out, I was like, oh, we're going to have so much fun. Like, this is right up my alley. So,
Yeah,
yes.
awesome. Okay, fun fact is I also have 4 kids and I have 3 girls, and then our youngest is a boy.
No. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that is too fun. That's the family I actually grew up in. I'm the oldest
Oh,
of the 3
wow.
girls, and then we had a little brother. And so I knew girls, the
Yeah.
majority, especially because my brother and I, there's like 11 years difference. And so when I started having boys, I was like, I don't know what to do with boys. And now that I have a girl, I'm like, wait, I'm a boy mom. How do I have a girl?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I always thought that I was gonna be a boy mom just because I grew up I had 3 older brothers. I have a sister, she was the oldest, and then 3 brothers, and then me, and then a younger brother, and so, like, I'm, like, sandwiched between all these boys, and so
Yeah.
anyways, it didn't work out. It didn't happen
Right?
that way. I did end up getting my boy, but, yeah, I ended up being a girl mom, and it's just been awesome. I love that relationship too. They're all good
They're
relationships.
all wonderful. They are. Yeah.
Yeah.
How funny, though. I love that.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've established connections between us, let's get more into what this podcast is all about. So I would love to hear why you think it's so important for us to know our divine worth.
This is probably one of my favorite questions, but for me, I feel like I originally was taught divine worth as sort of like a faraway identity where it was like, you have heavenly parents and you existed in this spiritual world and like that's who you are. And it was like, great, what does that have to do with me in my life here today? But the more I've come to recognize and realize that my human identity is actually like my second one. And so getting to know what is the spiritual part of me? Who am I as a spiritual being first and foremost? And that then is the opportunity to bring that version of me into my human life and experiences. So it's kind of completely reoriented the way that I view myself, I view my life, I view relationships with other people, is coming back to actually understanding it's not just some like, I don't know, Mormon bedtime story about this is where you came from and this is where you are, but like it's a literal part of we are spiritual beings.
Okay. So I love that shift in perspective because we can get so caught up in our mortal life and who we are as a mortal human being, right? And here you're talking about let's switch that and focus in on we were spirit beings before we came here, and we're still spirit beings inside these mortal bodies.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so when did you first realize that a lack of self-worth was an issue either for you or for someone you love?
Yeah. It's funny because some ways I look at that question, I'm like, when did I not? Like it almost has always been this undercurrent that was there for so much of my life. And yet I think the most prominent time when I started recognizing it more was actually when I was dating my husband. Well, now husband, obviously wasn't when we were dating, but we were high school sweethearts. So we started dating in high school. And that was kind of the first time I really had somebody asking me more about myself. What did I want? What was important to me? And I didn't realize how connected that was to these feelings I had of not enoughness or inadequacy. And it was kind of this weird thing where if you had asked me, I'd be like, well, I'm super confident, right? Like I'm really capable. I know I'm good at things. Like I can get things done. I feel really good. Like I was a high achiever in school and all of those types of things. And so it was weird to try and figure out where was this sense of not enoughness coming from. And that was kind of my first clue into it of realizing that for me, there was this disconnect between my relationship with myself. And that was the part that was kind of this undercurrent. I had a great relationship with God. I had a great relationship with my family, with friends, but my relationship with me, that was the bit that was kind of lacking in ways. And where I first started to see that coming up was when he started asking me about myself. And I was like, I don't know how to answer. I don't know.
So that got you more internally kind of thinking about
Yeah.
who you were. What happened from there?
Yeah. So from there, it was a really big journey in, I feel like God's starting to connect me more with myself. And I didn't realize that at the time. And this is probably the first time I've told our story from that perspective. I didn't even realize it until I was kind of preparing for us to meet that that was where a lot of this started. And what was actually going on in my experience at the time was I was trying to figure out how I felt about this relationship that I was in. And that started off as just kind of fun dating, and then as we got older became a lot more serious, and that was not at all my plan. Like, I was not going to be one of those Mormons who got married young, so the idea that I was already starting to connect with somebody in high school, like, that was a whole other layer of taboo. I grew up in, like, group dates, and that was the kind of the culture and thing, and so it was a really big challenge, I guess, for me to think about even beginning to consider marriage. And once we graduated, they had changed, that was right when they first changed the missionary age for women. And so all of my friends were starting to go on missions, and that's what was going on. And so I was starting to, have questions about what was my future going to look like and what was I supposed to do. And I had always planned on going on a mission. That was something I couldn't wait for. I had this aunt that I was in love with who she had went on a mission, and it was the coolest experience, and I grew up in a family that just loved missionaries. And so, I had this whole plan of like, I was going to go to school, I was going to go on a mission, I was going to do the study abroad, go to graduate school, like all these things. And then I would get married and have kids and kind of start my real life after that. And God basically said, I need you to do the opposite. I need you to get married young. And I was like, that is not my plan. That is not what I'm doing. And so throughout high school and the few years after we graduated, that was kind of my wrestle that was going on. And I feel like God was specifically walking me in so many different ways through this process of starting to understand who I was, but also more than that, putting this invitation out there of like, hey, I have an understanding of who you are, and I have a vision and a plan for you and your life. How much are you willing to trust me in that and say yes to it and step into it? And so it wasn't even really that the first thing was like, I'm starting to have these questions of like, I don't really know who I am. And then God is showing me this is who you are. That was not the next step. The next step was like, can you trust me that I know who you are first? And so I had a lot of really powerful experiences, basically leading me up to that decision. And we ended up eloping. And that was a whole other story on its own. But at 19, we went down to the courthouse and got married. And that began this initial journey. And it was starting this foundation that I would later learn was critical to my understanding of my worth and being able to operate in it, that was coming from this place of partnering and having a trust in God and a trust in myself, and the power of those two things operating together.
So this is just really really interesting to me. I love what you're saying because it's like you're at this point where it's like, well, who am I? And the Lord's like, just trust me, you know? And I love that because it's like it's not who really knows us, right?
Yeah.
It's the Lord. Like we can try to be like, oh, I like this and I like this and I like that, but at the same time, when it comes to who we are and our potential, it's like Heavenly Father knows so much more than we do. And so if we can put our faith and trust in him, he's gonna tell us um more about who we are. Okay, so here's something that's interesting so far about your story that I kind of want to dive more into is it sounds like you had a plan. So so in a way, like, did you have this vision of who you were because like with that plan?
Mm. Yeah.
And then why is it that you were questioning as to, wait, who am I during this time?
Oh, I love that question. Such a good one. Because I think it goes back to this dichotomy again of like, I was this confident person. So it was like operating from my mind of like, well, this is what I want to do. And these are all the good things that should be there. And so that part of me, I think part of that is just like my personality. But there was a part of it that was very much occupied in like, well, this is what you do, right? Like that
Mhm.
is what my aunt did. That was what my cousins did. Like I had followed these women in my life that I had looked up to and seen, well, that's what they do. And so I think I naturally ascribed myself into that plan and into that process. And it was almost like I hadn't even considered what else was available or possible. And it was really interesting as I was talking with some of my cousins and one of my best friends who were going through this decision of like, I'm going to go on a mission. I'm not going to get married. And that was like a huge thing in their family and for them because they grew up in a family that was like, women, your job is to get married. Like that is your first priority. And so to be saying, no, I feel like I need to be going on a mission first was like, I don't know, are you actually like focusing on what you need to? And so that was kind of this contrasting experience for me where I'd grown up with mission was the priority and I'm having this opposite experience and they were having like marriage is the priority. And so I think it wasn't even so much of like I didn't know well, no, I didn't know who I was because there's the next part of the story of what happens after we get married. But I think a part of it was I'd never really sat with myself to really consider all of the possibilities. I had just kind of been like, well, that looks great. And that's what somebody else is doing. And so, like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I had that plan. And it was kind of like God was pausing me for a minute and being like, girl, there is so much more that is here and available. I just
Mhm.
want to soak this in for you. And I have some other ideas that you may not be considering or thinking about here. And lean into me a little bit on this. Trust me here.
Okay, so I love what you just said, where it's like, girl, there's so much more here. It's like, let's just bring that in even more. There's so much more. Okay, so let's continue. What happened next?
Yeah, so we get married. We're living in a little condo down in Orem, Utah, just outside of Provo. We're not quite going to school yet. We're trying to figure out what we're doing. We've got some friends who are down in Provo, and I'm going through this whole process of all of a sudden, like, actually needing to get clear on who I am. And it's funny because it happened out of getting married. I remember being in the kitchen and we're making breakfast one day, and my husband is buttering toast. And he can tell that I kind of like pause and I'm like, that's not exactly how I make toast. And so he pauses for a minute and he's like, what's wrong? What's going on? And I'm like, I like the butter all the way to the edges. Like the whole point of having toast is to eat butter. Like, and he's just like barely spreading anything on it in the middle. And so he's like, but before I actually had said that to him, I was like, no, no, it's okay. Just like finish doing whatever you're doing. And he stops dead center and is like, no, tell me how you like your toast made. I don't want to find out in 30, 40 years that I've been making your toast wrong and we end up getting divorced because you have this built up resentment over he doesn't know me, he doesn't care about me. Like, tell me how you like your toast. And that kind of started this cascade of realizing I had preferences for different things, but I was not used to vocalizing them or even recognizing them in my own mind. So I was having these like emotional responses, but I viewed it as, well, that's not kind. I'm putting people out. I'm causing problems. I'm making more tension or making things more difficult. And so there was this whole subconscious experience that I was going through that I didn't even realize I was having until I had somebody else directed me in my life who was like, not buying it and not letting me play in it anymore and was like, you're going to tell me what you like. And so I bought a book on people pleasing because I realized that was like another avenue that came in from it. And it was hilarious because it had like a worksheet portion of it where it was literally like, what is your favorite color? What is your favorite food? Like actually going back to the literal basics. And I remember sitting there in the kitchen being like, okay, I don't have to like think of what is my sister like? What is my mom like? Like, could I actually decide something? And it sounds so dumb sometimes when I explain it, but that was the level of like bringing what was happening. I did have these preferences. I had them. It's not that they weren't there. It was that they hadn't reached the consciousness of my mind and they weren't moving into my experience through my voice and my actions. And so that's what I feel like I was integrating, was starting to have this experience of bringing those thoughts and feelings and desires alive in myself so that they could start being a part of my life.
Okay, this is so interesting because the last podcast episode that I recorded, she talked about how when she was a little girl, her mom gave her kind of like a would you rather book. Do you like this or do you like that? So that she could get to know herself a little bit better. And then it's like, here you're coming in and sharing with us how you started to recognize, oh, I do have these preferences that I didn't realize all these years that I had because I was just so focused on what can I do? How can I please others?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been fascinating because one of the things I'm now also obsessed with is understanding like divine femininity and what does that look like and how do we understand it and what are the unique ways of how we are as women and how we operate and how we think and feel and a lot of those we're cyclical beings, things like that. And so it's been fascinating for me to learn that there is this developmental process that is often different between masculine and feminine dynamics, where masculine often has this connection first with the self and then goes on this journey of learning to serve others or connect with others. And feminine has an opposite experience where we are first very connected and aware of others and the experiences that are going on around us, and then goes on this internal journey to come to know yourself. And so I felt like that was something I very much connected with. And part of the point is that both masculine and feminine end up having a relationship with themselves and with other people in a balanced way, but we kind of get there different ways sometimes. And so it was neat for me to start seeing that as like, I could read a room and pick up on like, oh, my sister wants to go here and my dad wants to go there. And like, what's all the little underlying emotions or things that were playing out in different family dynamics. But I hadn't yet learned how to recognize those same dynamics that were playing out in myself. And that's what I would start going on this process over the next decade of discovery was what's that internal world and realizing that was that gap that I was perceiving, and I was experiencing it as not enoughness, not trusting myself, not having a worth, but it was really just a blossoming of my natural development of moving from being oriented to other people and the experiences and things around me to coming into having a connection with myself so that I could then reintegrate that fullness of me back into my world and relationships.
So I just love this. One thing that a project that I have going on right now is writing a book, From Burden to Beloved, A Giver's Guide for Giving and Receiving Love. And it's interesting what you're saying because it's like we have this service oriented desire. Like we want to help others, we want to lift them up, we want to strengthen them. We start to identify to that to the point that we go to the extreme, where
Yes.
it's like we stop receiving when we really need that both the giving and the receiving to be able to create stronger relationships and connections and be able to make an even greater impact.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that you bring that up because fast forward a couple years and I have our second son and it ends up being an emergency C-section and I'm in the hospital for like a month afterwards with some other complications. My son gets discharged and my sweet husband is like working, taking care of a 2-year-old and a newborn all on his own while worried about his wife in the hospital. And I am get home and I have like lost so much muscle mass and stuff that I
Mm.
can like barely hold this 10-pound little brand new baby. We had just moved into a new apartment and so like we're still living in boxes and stuff. And at this point I had started a business as a professional organizer and I was really good friends with the Utah professional organizers ladies. There's a whole group of them. And they like started coming over and they're unpacking my stuff and they're cleaning my toilet and like bringing me tons of food and things. And I remember just sitting there on the bed being like literally incapacitated and feeling so uncomfortable to like just be sitting there while somebody else is cleaning my toilet. Like it was a visceral reaction of like, I'm resisting receiving this that I needed. And I remember reflecting and kind of praying on that conversation and God coming to me and being like, I am literally incapacitating you because you will not learn to receive any other way. Like you have got to learn this lesson, and this is the only way you're going to. So yes, you're going to sit there on that bed and you are going to let these people do things for you. And it was a really humbling experience of kind of my first experience of feeling like God was scolding me of like, you are gonna learn this and you are going to receive something. But it was a really powerful lesson for me that opened this doorway of what it means to receive. And I would later come to learn and understand, especially as women, what the word receive really means and how essential it is. If you think about even the ordinances and in the temple, how many times do we use the word receive? Receive the Holy Ghost. Like it is an active part of spiritual power, of life, of covenant living, of relationship with God. And I believe is meant to be, we're not just like doing life and like getting things done and doing the checklist, but actually we're supposed to be receiving life. And the more that we receive, the more we then have the capacity to put into our own lives and relationships and experiences. And so I thought at that point, this was just like a humbling experience of just, hey, you need to be able to like let other people help you and do things in your life. And I would later learn, no, this is a foundation of a powerful spiritual principle that you need to understand and that is going to transform your life and the way you live and the way you operate. And it came back to that moment. So I love that you brought up that point of receive. Like, so good.
That's so good. And I thank you for sharing your experience with that too. And just you said that so eloquently about having that balance and the impact that it can have. Okay, so I do kind of want to go back just a little bit
Yeah,
though
please.
to because here you're finding more of what your preferences are. And there sometimes when we start to do that, there's this fear that can come up because we might conflict with someone else's preferences. So
Yes.
I kind of want to dive more into that aspect
Yeah.
of kind of okay, how did you start to handle that and continue to grow in that area even when that opposition started to happen?
So good. Thank you for asking that because it really was a genuine problem, honestly, because and I think that was part of the original stumbling block, I guess, in a way, for why I struggled to bring my preferences into my mind is because I genuinely viewed it as this way of I care about other people, I want other people to be happy, and so I wanted to be accommodating and kind and like whatever you want. Yes, we're gonna go out as a family for dinner, so like I'm fine with whatever. I love everything. Like I'll be good with whatever. But it took some consciousness to start realizing that underneath that was a really big fear around contention, which is exactly what I feel like you're getting at, where it was like, I do not know how to deal with contention, like at all. And this was another fascinating aspect of my marriage relationship too. And again, why I just look at like, oh my gosh, God knew exactly the vehicle I needed for all of this learning because I grew up in a family and a home where like I don't know if you ever watched Everybody Loves Raymond, the old 90s show, but there's a character in there at one point, Amy, and she says, my parents wouldn't have yelled if their hair was on fire. And I was just like, oh, that is my family. Like, we do not yell, you do not get angry. You I thought it was this level of like, oh, we're just so kind and compassionate. And genuinely there was. Like, there was such a family legacy of like bonding and connection that was beautiful. And there was also this imbalance that I realized did not, I was not raised in a way to know how to handle conflict and differences and anger and emotion. And I never saw that modeled. I never had my parents really disagree in front of me at all. And it's funny because there were the 4 kids of us. So there was the 3 girls and then my brother, and me and my older sister. In a lot of ways, we kind of joke that we were raised in one family and then we like moved out of the house, and my younger 2 siblings were raised in another one. And it was fascinating because the younger siblings grew up in a totally different one where like all of a sudden you're like talking back to mom and dad and like all these different things. I did not talk back at my parents at all as a teenager. Like, and I shut down my siblings when they were like wanting to be normal teenagers, right? And I was like, no, 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 we don't do that and all these things. So all of that is to say, my husband grew up in a family that was quite the opposite, where like they loved to argue for fun. Like that was the whole part of their bonding experience. So the first time I'm going to like Sunday dinner and his 2 brothers are like getting into it, and I'm just like, oh, what is going on here? And they're just having fun and enjoying it. And so, my husband comes into this marriage from this place of not being afraid of conflict or anger or any of those things at all. And if anything, he was needing to learn from me some of how to like temper that a little bit in ways, but he was also there to kind of ignite it in me. And so in a weird way, one of the most powerful things was actually learning how to deal with the emotion of anger itself. Like before I could deal with contention and being afraid of that, I had to deal with the underlying thing of I don't know how to feel anger. Like I genuinely was like, I don't know what anger feels like. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it because it's this really bad thing. So even if I let myself start to potentially feel anger, like what then? Like, I don't want to just become somebody who's yelling all the time or who's just like feeling this horrible way. So I felt really stuck in a lot of ways because I was starting to get this image of like, okay, there's a few gaps here and some things that I need to learn better. And I'm having some of these experiences. And so I can see some of the value, but I'm also really stubborn in my way of like, this is unhealthy. This is bad. This is wrong. Like I had a lot of judgment around him and his family and things. And it was again, kind of another humbling process. And I feel like a key part of it was actually my children, where I was like, I want to figure this out for my children because my kids are, 2-year-olds and they're having anger. And I want to be able to know how to navigate them through that. And so that really became a doorway, opening it up for me of starting to learn how to recognize my emotions, how to process my emotions, and especially get in touch with anger. And once anger was no longer such a scary thing, and I felt like I knew what to do with it or how to move with it and how to feel it, then contention also wasn't as scary because I could start to recognize I don't have to be afraid of the emotions that I'm feeling. I know what to do with them if that contention comes up. But also, there was a whole other process of recognizing that just because I thought or felt something different than somebody else did not mean there had to be anger or conflict. That like we could also just be 2 separate people who like different things. And that actually became one of our mottos in our family was like, everybody is allowed to like different things because sometimes there would come up this thing of like, well, if you don't, and it's funny actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the thing that it really came down to was chocolate. Because I grew up in a family that loves chocolate, like chocolate ice cream, chocolate cake. There was chocolate at like every Sunday dinner. That was the thing. It was, oh, chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. And my husband, like, they hardly had desserts. I don't even know if he has a sweet tooth. And I kind of feel like something is wrong with him because he doesn't like sweets enough. So it became this thing where it was like, depending on who you were talking with, it was like, well, what's wrong with dad? He doesn't like sweets or chocolate. Or on the flip side, well, what's wrong with mom? She's so obsessed with chocolate and sweets. Like, I'm so much better that I don't. So it became this really easy way to quickly put like one person is better than the other because we just actually were different people. And so that became our phrase to kind of remind us of like, everybody is allowed to like different things and to recognize that my preferences and his preferences were a part of what made us who we were, and that it was okay if he doesn't like chocolate, and it was okay if I'm obsessed with it. And that became a part of that dynamic. So I would say there were kind of those 2 different pieces to it of recognizing we could have differences and that could be okay. And also recognizing that there was some work to be done around how to feel negative emotions and navigate those as well.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that in because there are definitely 2 parts to that, and how you started with the feeling those more difficult emotions, more uncomfortable emotions, like they're the emotions that are harder for us to just sit with and just feel and process. So, because that's part of it, when you get to the point where you're able to process those emotions, then it's kind of that is the next step, is to be able to recognize that it's okay for people, because it's hard to accept that it's okay for us to have differences if we are not processing those more uncomfortable emotions.
And I think there's a unique lens that I found also comes into play, especially as Latter-day Saints, and I wanna say even more so as, like, women who are in the church, because there's this beautiful doctrine and ideal of, like, we love going to the temple and everybody's dressed in white because we're all the same before God and God loves all of us, and, like, this idea of we wanna build Zion and we're all together and everyone belongs, and, like, there's these beautiful things that sometimes it can be like, well, how does that translate into my human experience? And so it can be
Mhm.
really easy to get caught in the spot of if I'm feeling negative emotion, I'm doing something wrong. Like I'm sinning, I'm bad. I just need to trust God more. I should be better at doing this and not recognizing that our negative emotions are actually a beautiful, integral, central part of the process, and that when we are just bypassing them or not allowing ourselves to experience them, we're actually missing out on a part of who we are. And I believe we're actually missing out on an essential part of the gospel and the plan, which is I don't believe we were supposed to like, we started out as spirits and then we became human beings. And now we have to somehow turn this human being self back into something divine or like God. I actually think we started out like God. Like that's what it means to be a spiritual being. We are literal spiritual offspring of a heavenly father and a heavenly mother. And so that means we are already intrinsically divine. It's not something that we have to like turn into. That was the starting point. And so from that lens of our identity, what then is the purpose of our human experience? And to me, the purpose is something we see modeled through Jesus Christ, which is to descend from godhood into humanity, to gain a human physical body and to learn how to embody and express our divinity through our humanity. And so we see that modeled so beautifully in his life where he felt pain, he had suffering, he had anguish, but that did not make him any less divine. In fact, that was actually what allowed him to access the most powerful part of the ministry that he did through the atonement. He had to feel pain. He had to feel it. It was a central aspect of it to the degree that he bled from every pore. And yet we sometimes want to cut that out of the experience and say, oh no, I'm getting a little too close to the garden here. I need to just like be Resurrection Sunday type of being, and not realizing like that doesn't have any weight to it unless we learn to embody it. And sometimes we go the other way and we get too caught up in the human experience and we're just like, life is so terrible and all these things. And then we can get lost in it as well. So there is kind of this balance of playing of like, okay, well, I need to rely on God and I need to be connected to God, but also I can't lose this part of myself. And I feel like that's ultimately this balancing game that we're learning to do, almost like how to ride a bike, you know, and we get to that place where it's like the two pedals of my humanness and my spiritualness, my humanness and my spiritualness. And when we get into a good rhythm with that, to me, that is where I have found the greatest level of connection, and that's actually where my worth connected. And so when I was not feeling those emotions and I was not moving through them, I was limiting myself. I was losing part of myself. I was cutting off part of myself. And part of that self was the divinity in me that wanted to be expressed through my humanness, not my
Mm.
humanness was failing to measure up to my divine potential. And that was a huge shift to start recognizing that difference.
Okay, that is fascinating. I'm a coach, so we, and one thing that I do is I do take people through feeling those uncomfortable emotions and doing from this place of love and acceptance, because though that is a part of yourself. I think a lot of the times when we feel lonely, when we feel neglected or unseen, it's actually because we're neglecting a part of ourselves. And it's those uncomfortable, those uncomfortable emotions, and there's probably a better word, but those emotions that we are not fully processing, they're just indicators that, hey, there's something that we need to learn here. There's something that a part of ourselves is trying to tell us. And so just taking that time to get really clear on what it is that part of ourself is telling us, and then thanking that part of ourself for wanting that. And it's just such a powerful experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love how you phrased that. I relate to it very much because that's something similar that I love to describe when I'm helping somebody work through emotions, is that the uncomfortable ones are almost like the rumble strips on the freeway that kind of let you know when you're veering off track and when we're coming back on. And so it's like they're actually a really powerful, good tool. Like, yes, I want to know when I'm going off and when I'm back on the road, and recognizing that that road or that part of you that you were saying, a part of ourselves is trying to let us know something or recognize something. To me, I love looking at it through this lens of that is our true self, our spiritual self, that is trying to say, there's a part of me I want to bring into this human physical experience. And so it's letting us recognize, like, what's that next piece that I get to embody? What's the next part of this journey? And learning what does that pattern and that process look like for getting to bring, like, I think of the fullness of who we are spiritually as like this giant or something of us, and it's like funneling into our human experience, and that we are so much more than what we have learned to hold in our physical body, and that those are those experiences of like, oh, I'm going to play at this experience, and now I get to play at this experience, and now I get to play at this one. And so seeing those emotions that can be really uncomfortable, they're uncomfortable because it's almost like this growing pain. Like you're expanding physically to be able to hold more of yourself in your life and get to bring that into the experience. And when I started reframing it from that lens of, oh, this is an invitation to be more of who I already am. Because more is sometimes a scary word, right? Because then it's like, well, I'm not going to measure up, and how can I do this? And I'm already failing it this way. But if it's, oh, this is who I already am, and I just get to practice bringing more of who I already am into my life, well, that's a little bit of a different story there.
So good. Okay, so these are the questions that I ask everyone. What is your favorite divine worth scripture?
Yes, I love that you asked this one because it gave me a minute to think, and I realized that my favorite one is probably Exodus 3, which is not one most of us are as familiar with. Like, even just hearing the reference, I'm like, is that really the reference? But this is one where God says unto Moses, I am that I am. And I love that phrase because, again, my lens that I'm always looking at things is, what does it actually mean if I am a literal child of God? Meaning I am like God is. So if God is saying, I am that I am, then that is my desire too, is to recognize, how can I become a being who knows within the core of who I am that I am. And what that phrase means to me is this beautiful idea that God is not God because God has power over everyone and everything, which is, I think, a flawed version of how we sometimes view God. I think of it instead that God is God because no one and nothing has power over God. And that has become like the foundation of really getting rooted in my worth, is that not my circumstances, not what other people think, not what's going on in my life, not how I wish other people would be different or anything that's going on in the world. None of those things get to decide or dictate who I am or how I'm going to show up in the world. I am that I am. And when I remember that piece of it, my worth is solid because it's not dependent on a person changing or the way that I show up or how my kids turn out or the grade I got. Like, none of those things matter anymore. I am that I am because this is who I am and it's who I choose to be. And so that's my space that I'm always coming back to, especially when it's in terms of my worth.
And that goes along so well with our entire discussion here, and just how much like that phrase, like just the phrase that you were sharing not that long ago, and so now I gotta like catch myself up. But you're making room for more of who I am. That's what you had said. Making room for more of who I am. And so it all ties in. And so thank you so much for sharing that. My next question is, what is one small and simple thing that those listening can do to take action on what we've been talking about?
Oh, that is such a good question. I actually was talking about this with my gals in my mentorship program today because there was some struggles that were coming up. And my basic rule of thumb that I always come back to, the fundamental question when I'm struggling, when I'm lost, when I don't know what to do, is what do I want? Because when I ask myself, what do I want? It actually always reorients me to where I need to go. And so I struggled with desire for a long time. I was like, oh, that's too selfish. I can't focus on this. But what I realized is if I would stop and actually ask myself, usually the answers were things like, I want to lie down in my bed for a second. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, you've kind of been going for 5 hours straight. Maybe you should sit down for a minute. Or even something as simple as like, I want a cookie. And it was like, oh, I want some joy in my life. I want to feel a little something. And that always gives me that opportunity to reorient back to myself first. Because when I reorient back to who I am, I'm automatically reorienting back to God because I am an extension of God, the fullness of me. And so then from that place, I can get back into my life. And the same way negative emotions can be this kind of indicator that we're losing that joy and peace and pleasure and creativity, I feel like are those moments when we're most connected to ourselves and alive. Asking what I want and finding some sort of pleasure or joy or fun, those are the fastest ways I find to reconnect with that worth.
Okay. Yeah. Like even now as we're talking, I'm like, I've got more questions. I do. You know what? I am going to ask this one though, because we talked about feeling the uncomfortable emotions. Sometimes it's also uncomfortable for us to feel joy and those more of those emotions that we actually do want to feel more of.
Yes, when they start showing up in your life, I was literally talking to my mentor this past week of like, I'm starting to hit some of the experiences that I wanted in life. And I'm like, I'm so uncomfortable. I can't have this much joy in my life. Like something is wrong to be feeling this good. And there is a piece of like, we have to acclimate to it sometimes. So yes, I love that.
Okay, so good. All right. Well, Emily, I have just one more question, and that is how can those listening connect with you?
Yeah. Easiest way is probably on Instagram. I'm Emily Carolynn Baker there. Carolyn has 2 N's. It's my mom and my grandma's name combined together. So Carolyn. And that's probably the easiest way. I love doing free webinars. I have my mentorship program. There's lots of ways we connect and play together. And I love sharing fun LDS stories and experiences there too. So that's probably the best place.
All right, great. Well, Emily, this has been great talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you have found this podcast to be a light, please share it with others and or leave a review, which helps others find the podcast as well. To learn more about your divine worth and potential, you can download some free scripture cards focused on your worth at karenpapin.com/scripture cards. That's KarenPapin.com/scripture cards. You are of worth. You have a purpose. The Lord loves you and He believes in you. And only you can make the impact on this world that you are meant to make. Join me next time as we talk more about divine worth and potential.